Are you listening? Damn. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And welcome into another episode of the Damn Podcast here on the 24/7 Sports Podcast Network and powered by BeaverBlitz.com. I'm your host, Carter Bahns, joined as always by BeaverBlitz.com publisher Angie Machado here on Monday, February 27th. That's right, we are back to our Monday schedule after the opening weekend of baseball threw us off just a little bit last week. But we're here on a Monday to recap the weekend that was in Corvallis. But most of all, Angie, you and I are previewing spring football today because it is 1 week away. As far as most people are probably listening to this, at least on the podcast side, on Tuesday. We're here on Monday. It opens on Tuesday, March 7th. So we're going to preview it today, go in depth there for most of the show. We do want to spend a little bit time on baseball and basketball because it was a very busy weekend in Corvallis. But the bulk of this episode is going to talk about all the things what we are watching on the practice fields this spring as Oregon State gears up for its 15 practice slate. Angie, welcome in. Hope you are doing well on this Monday. It's gloomy outside, but most of the snow has passed, so we're back to work. We are totally locked in.
Yeah, it must be spring camp because a major hailstorm just went through my house here, and I'm just got to gear up to like bundle up because I'm used to being cold and yucky for spring camp. But thinking about all those kids in Oregon who start spring sports today. Both of my boys, I have a baseball tryout and a golf tryout, and like I said, it is nasty. I feel bad for those kids, but let's go. We got a busy show. We don't need to talk about snow and kiddos.
No. As much as we could talk about the absolute blizzard that occurred on Wednesday night, and then the amount of snow and hail I drove through to get to Corvallis yesterday for the series finale at Goss, we have more important things to talk about. So we are going to preview spring camp today as opposed to next week. As I'm going to try not to brag about this, but I will not be available.
Yeah, let's hear where you're going, Carter. Let's just hear.
I will be out of the state. I'll put it that way. No, going to Paris this weekend. Going to be there for a week. So Angie will have all of the spring camp coverage for week 1, and then we'll kind of trade off the rest of the way. But yeah, make sure you're following Angie closely next week because she'll have the exclusive coverage for BeaverBlitz. But let's start with baseball. And again, we're going to try to kind of cruise through this, but there is a lot to talk about because it was, frankly, just a high-scoring weekend at Goss. The home opener, Oregon State sweeps Coppin State in 3 games by scores of 11-1, 16-0, and 19-5. That's a combined score of 45-6 across 3 games. So, I mean, just sheer and utter dominance there. Obviously, the offense getting the job done with 3 double-digit scores on the weekend. The Beavers have now won 6 straight since their opening day loss. They stand at 6-1 with a run differential on the season of 81-26. So yeah, pretty much since that first loss since the first game, the loss to New Mexico, and the first win 8-7 against Minnesota, it's pretty much been all Oregon State since then.
Yeah, and I mean, talk about just an explosion of offense. Fun to see.
A couple of guys getting recognized for their play this weekend. Of course, when you dominate a team like Oregon State did, you're bound to produce some pretty impressive individual numbers. It was Trent Sellers with his 12 strikeouts and Gavin Turley with his 2 home runs, earning the Pac-12 pitcher and Pac-12 player of the week. So Oregon State sweeps the conference awards. That was announced earlier this afternoon. 2 standout performances from 2 guys that we expected to be well, not necessarily Sellers. We weren't really talking about Sellers until after week 1, but after opening weekend, it was very apparent that these 2 guys were going to be some of the stars on this team. It did not take them very long to earn recognition Angie, I'm not sure how much baseball you were able to watch on that Oregon State live stream, but did you catch either of Sellers' outing or Turley's home runs?
No, but I had family issues going on, but so I didn't. But I was following your thread in the lodge, and I've spoken to a couple people very close to the program. And Carter, I haven't talked to you, but I've just heard so many things about Gavin Turley, just that he is a star in the making. So I'm excited to kind of watch his progress, as we go forward. But those close to the Goss Fieldhouse are speaking his praises.
Yeah, one of the home runs for Turley, and it was actually the second one, but he had two on the weekend. The first came in his first Goss Stadium career at bat, a weekend after he had a home run in his first career at bat overall. But the second one, 435 feet and 110 miles per hour off the bat, just absolutely crushed. And one of the hardest hit home runs I think I've seen at Goss. That thing bounced really at the edge of the left field parking lot and probably about a quarter of the way up those super tall trees in the outfield. I was talking to Mike Parker after later on in the game, and he said he was actually in the middle of parking his car out there and was almost hit by Gavin Turley's home run. Said he came into the press box, of course, covering basketball this weekend, so not doing the play-by-play, and was very quick to tell me how hard that ball was hit. Shout out to the Damn Analytics squad, by the way. We've highlighted them on the show before for providing these numbers, pitching and hitting numbers available on their Twitter account. If you haven't checked that out, I believe they're at DAS Beavers. Definitely make sure you're following them throughout the season for some of those numbers. A couple of the other standouts from the weekend: Micah McDowell shining with a 5-hit day on Saturday. That's obviously a career best for him. So far, staying in the lineup, he's healthy again and living up to some of the potential that he brought with him when he came into Oregon State from Nova Scotia 3 years ago in that 2020 season. Another guy, Mikey Kane, just an absolutely incredible weekend. This is a guy who transferred in as a sophomore after spending a year at junior college and filled in for Kyle Dernetti at shortstop and didn't miss a beat after starting at third base in the first few games of the season. His defense was off the charts, but offensively too. Now, I mean, it's hard to find somebody more consistent than Mikey Kane to open the season. He has a hit in all 7 games to open his Oregon State career. He had a home run and a triple in the series finale and has been one of the more impressive players on this team. Again, as a newcomer, that's pretty awesome to see right away.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's especially, Dernetti's been so solid on that left side of the field at shortstop. So to see him be able to make the move over to short, fill in, and really, like you said, not miss a beat, it was huge for Oregon State as they have depth. What do we know where Dernetti has been?
Yeah. So I was going to say, Kyle Dernetti dealing, from what I've heard, with an illness.
Okay.
He played on Friday and
Okay.
wasn't able to go the rest of the weekend. I've heard that there's a bug kind of going through the team. And unfortunately, it held him out. But again, gave an opportunity to Mikey Kane, and he took it and shined. Another guy I want to highlight here who made his Oregon State debut this weekend after not playing on opening weekend is Jacob Craig at first base, who he had 13 plate appearances on the weekend, and these numbers are pretty wild. So in 13 plate appearances, 4 hits, 6 walks. That's 3 in his 2 starts.
That's
only 1 strikeout. 8 RBI and 4 runs scored. Craig had more RBI than at bats in his first weekend of action. That is really tough to do.
Yeah, no, that's awesome.
For a freshman to come in and again to play that well early on, making your debut. Again, the level of competition, you can talk all you want about that. Obviously, drawing the walks, that is more. It's at least largely representative of the pitching that you're facing, but to capitalize on your first appearance at Oregon State like that, that's one of the best weekends from a true freshman I've ever seen.
Yeah, talk about confidence builder.
No kidding. You mentioned Dernetti's absence. I want to highlight a couple other guys that are still out. So Ruben Cedillo did not play at all this weekend. Started in center field for Oregon State last weekend. He was unavailable this week. Mitch Canham said that he kind of tweaked his wrist a little bit Don't expect it to be a long-term absence. He could be back next weekend. We'll have to wait and see there, but sounds relatively minor for Ruben Cedillo. And then Ben Ferrer, who we reported out with mono. Mitch Canham said still no firm timeline on him. He's feeling a little bit better, but it's one of those things that you really don't want to rush. So making progress, but still going to be a little bit of time before we see Ben Ferrer. Of course, like I said, no firm timeline, but if I had to guess, you're probably looking at the middle of the season for that, as far as just what the precedent has been with guys who have had mono in the past.
Yeah, because they have to not only get healthy, but then work their way back to game shape.
Especially as a pitcher, too.
Yeah.
Takes a little while. Okay, let's close with a rankings update for baseball because it is Monday and rankings do update on Mondays. I'm curious what is... I'm not going to blame D1 baseball for not ranking Oregon State, but it has been the one publication that so far in the preseason, after week 1 and after week 2, has continued to be the outlier, not ranking Oregon State in its top 25. The Beavers this week check in at number 18 at Collegiate Baseball, 19 at Baseball America, 24 in the coaches poll, and 26 in the College Baseball Writers Association top 30. So that's 2 top 20s, a top 25, and a top 30, and then unranked at D1 baseball.
Which is
still
really
feels about
fun.
right. Still feels about right before.
Yeah. D1 baseball.
We haven't gotten the conference play. They haven't proven anything, but
but to not be ranked at all by D1 baseball, who usually is pretty bullish on the Beavs. So interesting to see that.
Yeah, in the past we've seen D1 be on the higher side of the rankings for Oregon State. I do think they probably still have some concerns about the pitching.
Yeah.
I feel like that's
completely
probably
valid.
warranted.
Yeah.
Oregon State's rotation, of course, kind of struggling in opening weekend, and then Jaron Hunter on Sunday gave up 5 runs to Coppin State. So still a few questions there. I think Trent Sellers answered a few questions maybe about his efficiency this week, going a little bit deeper with those 12 strikeouts. But yeah, obviously still some questions there on the pitching staff. Again, Oregon State, almost a consensus top 25 team. Quick basketball notes before we get into our football preview. Again, we want to save about probably 75% of this episode for football. I was down in Corvallis for the men's basketball game against Oregon on Saturday. The women's basketball team also closed out its regular season on Saturday. It was a busy day. You had 2 basketball games at Gill, a baseball game at Goss, and then a softball game. Oh, are they down in Southern
They're
California?
down in SoCal,
Yeah. But women's basketball beats number 14 Arizona on senior day. I think it was long overdue for Oregon State to win one of these games. I mean, you can only lose so many 1, 2, 3 possession games before you finally win one. And they broke through there. That's a pretty nice win for a program that definitely took a step.
And it was a rough weekend for the Wildcats. I know we're a Beaver show, but they lost women's and men's basketball and baseball. So it was
the women's team was swept also because they lost to Oregon as well. But that buzzer beater by Devin Cambridge at ASU was something else.
Yeah.
And then on the men's side, they lose to Oregon. It's a last second jumper by Rivaldo Soares, a game that was really back and forth the whole way. Oregon did kind of pull away and led by double digits there in the second half. But for the second time in as many meetings this year, Oregon State, with a strong second half to close the margin and eventually take the lead. That's 2 comebacks in 2 games of after trailing by double digits for Oregon State against Oregon. But they come up short. They held a lead with, I want to say, about a minute left, and then ended up losing it again on that last second jumper by Soares. My takeaway from that game, though, Angie, was the atmosphere at Gill. Obviously, I know this is a down year. It's the second down year in a row for Oregon State. There's a lot of apathy in the fan base, but somebody forgot to tell the Oregon State students that that's the case, because they set an attendance record. At least Oregon State claims it was on Saturday, close to 3,000 students in attendance. And I told you before the show, I said that was the best atmosphere at an Oregon State basketball game since before COVID. I'll stand by that.
That's awesome. I heard the same thing. I spoke with Mike Parker yesterday, and he said the same thing. He said it was the best. He said best atmosphere all year at Gill. So just too bad they couldn't eke out a win. But if they can somehow hold this team together, this young roster, I think this is kind of Wayne Tinkle's last shot here. I mean, keep these guys together, see what they can do 23, 24, and, show some improvement.
Completely agree. All right, let's take a quick break and we'll come back with our spring camp preview in just a minute. But we want to let everybody know that we do still have our 30% off deal at BeaverBlitz. Again, this applies only to new members. This is your first annual subscription. You can take 30% off. That comes out to $6.27 per month. Again, we've been promoting this for about a month, but I promise you this does not last forever. So definitely want to make sure that you take advantage of that while you can. Again, one more time, 30% off your first year with an annual subscription to BeaverBlitz.com. It's the only way you're going to be able to read our spring camp practice reports, JP's weekly walk-off throughout baseball season, and get engaged in the lodge and joining in the discussion there. So make sure you take advantage of that while it lasts, because again, it will not last forever. Okay, the spring camp preview, Angie, are you ready for this?
I am ready, because I don't know about you, Carter. This is the most, I'm not a huge fan of spring camp. Not my favorite time of year. But this year, it just feels different. There's a buzz and it's exciting. And I'm so excited to get to Corvallis next Tuesday.
It does have a different feel to it. I mean, we had people asking us when the spring game is before the season was even over. Like, that is the level of anticipation that this offseason is coming with. I don't even want to know what September is going to be like as far as fan base engagement. Like, that is going to be crazy. But just the fact that everybody is so tuned in right now, even in the month of February, going into obviously March, bringing the start of spring camp. I have not seen that in my now, 5 spring camps that I've covered. Obviously it makes sense. You're coming off your first 10-win campaign in 15, 16, 17 years. But yeah, it's impressive to see the fan base so engaged. And we have a lot. I know that we're watching, and I know that there are so many questions that we have heard and we'll continue to hear, things that people want us to keep our eyes on. We're going to try to serve you as best as we can throughout the spring. We get 15 opportunities to do so in total. I doubt that we will have access to all of them.
No.
Oftentimes they will close down a Saturday or two here and there to run some close scrimmages, but we will probably get somewhere between 10 to 13 opportunities, I would imagine. Angie, just before we even dive into the schedule, our thoughts, our the overviews, you just have any key things that you want to highlight that you're watching before we really jump into this?
Well, and I think this is going to be what we jump into, because I think me, like you, Carter, all eyes are going to be on the quarterbacks this spring. This is going to be not only do you have DJ on campus, you have Aiden Childs on campus. So that is, and then Ben Goldbranson, to see if he's taken a step. This is going to be the main storyline, I think, heading into fall camp or spring camp. Sorry, I keep saying fall camp. But
it's
then
okay,
also,
Angie, we know you like fall camp.
I know I love fall camp. It is my favorite time of year. So spring camp, obviously that is 1A, but 1B is going to be, for me, wide receivers. We have some new wide receiver faces. And, I think if Oregon State had it's the biggest Achilles heel this past season, it was quarterback wide receiver play. So with those additions that are here in the spring, that is, I think, front and center for me. And I know a lot of our fan base as well.
We'll dive more into that in just a minute, but we want to start with some of the more just the logistics of camp. If you're not familiar or you haven't heard what the schedule is this spring, it's very similar to what Oregon State has done now the last 2 years, I believe. I think it was 3 years ago that they went later in the spring, but this is now, again, I think the third year that they've started in the first full week of March. So day one, like I said earlier, Tuesday, March 7th, they'll go Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday for 2 weeks. And then they will take a 2-week break for finals and then spring break. Come back on Thursday, April 6th. They'll return to that Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday routine. With the exception of the final week, there are 4 practices in the final week of camp. They will go Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, And then Saturday, April 22nd is the spring game. So mark your calendars. April 22nd, we presume that will be the only opportunity for the public to come watch. That has been the case ever since Jonathan Smith took over. There is one public practice, and that is the spring game. Again, that's coming on April 22nd. Angie, let's just offer some of our kind of general thoughts on spring camp. Weather-wise, you're probably going to see a mix of cold and wet and sunny and mild. It seems like every year we have a couple of practices where we are bundled up with our umbrellas, and then a couple where we're borderline t-shirts and shorts, because that's what happens in Oregon in the spring. I think you'll see Oregon State use the indoor facility a little bit, but they do try to keep most, if not all of it, outside. Maybe a practice or two in Reeser before the spring game as well. I don't. Packing for spring camp is always it's always an adventure. But.
It's an adventure, and trying to stay dry, warm. Yeah, there's been a few spring camps that I seriously think I froze to death. It was horrible. And then there's been other times where I mean, years ago, I did a story on Wyatt, the popsicle kid that would bring popsicles down. So we've had spring camps where, like Carter said, days where it's 70 degrees and the guys are eating popsicles, and other days that it feels like it might snow and we're bundled up. So that, I think that is the biggest kind of the downfall of spring camp in Oregon, is just, and going as early as they are in March, is the fact that the weather can be so, and it seems like kind of a late winter right now with the snow we just had. So hopefully it doesn't look good right now looking at the 10-day trend. So I think the big puffy coat's coming with me down to Corvallis next Tuesday, but it'll be cold for a while. I do think we'll be outside a lot. The first couple of days are going to be the acclimation period. So they won't be going full pads. It'll be more just kind of conditioning type stuff. And then they'll go full pads. So very similar in that regard to fall camp.
Yeah, I was going to say, actually, the last probably, I would say the last 3 years of the Smith era, we have seen, even in the acclimation period, they've gotten quite a bit done. Yeah. The first 2 years that I remember covering spring camp, there's still so many new guys. There were, even walk-ons that were kind of auditioning for roster spots. You had new coming transfers who, not as many early enrollees. Guys were just getting there right then. Like, there was a while there where the first few days of camp were, I don't want to say unwatchable, but it was dry. And we don't really see a whole lot of that anymore. It feels like now that you've got the roster and staff continuity, there's very little learning. There's very little conditioning, because they do that in January and February now. They kind of just dive right in. So like you said, until pads come on, we're not going to have a ton of live scrimmage opportunities to report on. But those first few days, they will do enough that we will have full practice reports. And especially when it comes to the newcomers, I mean, that's really what we're watching those first couple of days, just to see what those guys look like. And
the receivers and the quarterbacks, they'll be going. I mean, they'll be running routes. It might be more skelly drill, but they'll be going. And I mean, we've been watching, some of the guys have been putting stuff online of their, off-season workout sessions. And so it's been fun to see some of those guys work out. Yeah. Martinez clocking 21 miles an hour at 230 pounds. He's gained 15 pounds. He's going to be unstoppable, Carter.
He's going to be one of those, do you remember probably 2 camps ago when we got our first look at Luke Musgrave, and the good weight that he put on in 2 months after, probably 3 months after that season ended was it was like 2 different players.
Yeah. Yeah.
Pretty crazy.
He went from a boy to a man, in 3 months.
That's one of the fun things that we like to watch during camp. A couple of things that personally I like to get out of the spring. First look at new guys. Like I said, you do get a decent amount of transfers, and nowadays so many freshmen enrolling early. It's exciting to see what they look like right away. But also identifying potential breakouts. I mean, I'll remind you, last spring, this is when we identified Damian Martinez as potentially a star in the fall. BJ Baylor, Jamar Jefferson. I
said last spring that he might be the best freshman since Quiz Rogers.
Yeah, and that was in March.
And it was March, yes.
Guys again, recently, the running backs, BJ Baylor, Jamar Jefferson, we've identified them in the spring. In the defensive backfield, Rajon Wright. Last spring, you could tell that he took a huge step forward. It's very possible that we will identify a couple of guys in the spring that really take the next step in the fall. Like we do get that opportunity. So it is kind of fun to kind of place a bet on who we think will continue to have a pretty good off season. And then lastly, for me, I think spring camp, oftentimes you're not dealing with the position battles. You're not going through scrimmage left and right. So for us, it kind of gives us an opportunity to focus on just some fun storylines, interview players and coaches, and provide background on them and highlight them and feature them more than some of the X's and O's like we do in fall camp. It's one of those unique opportunities where we get to watch them for 2 months and then highlight their stories rather than, okay, this is what the team's doing to get ready for the season.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all those interviews we get, it's priceless. And then you get to know, you're there so much. You do kind of get to pick up on some of the guys. Some of them love the media. I mean, I wouldn't say love us, but they tolerate us and they tease us, or, then there's the others that like to run the other way from us. But I think it's all good. I mean, and the coaches, they get to see the coaches and tell their stories too.
Our coverage plan this spring, I assume, I mean, we haven't conferenced at all, but probably will be pretty similar to the past. Our daily practice reports in the lodge, again, that will be a VIP feature, but then interview videos from after practice, again, those features that we were just talking about. We are going to do weekly recaps on the podcast side. So that's something that, of course, if you're listening now, I'm sure you'll probably be tuning in throughout the spring. We will spend most of our time talking football. We'll do some baseball as well as the season rolls on, but recapping what we saw on the practice field the week before. We'll share a little bit of practice film on YouTube with kind of like we did in the fall, our takeaways and use some B-roll in there. Really, we don't get many opportunities to shoot. It's really just warm-ups and stretching. But we do like to share a little bit of that because obviously we know that opportunities to see them practice are so slim for the public. So we'll do what we can there. And then, like I said, Angie will have all of week one, and then I'll kind of step in and, we'll share the load the rest of the way. All right. You want to let's deep dive into this roster. We've got a half hour left, so let's just do it.
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's start with the offense. And Angie, you mentioned the quarterback situation already. And I think obviously it's always the most talked about position group, even when there's like no quarterback controversy, who the guy is. Like even then, it is still the position that gets the most press in the offseason for good reason.
Yeah.
But particularly this year at Oregon State. I mean, this is probably, I don't know how much of a competition it is, but this is probably like the most competition per se in the room that we will have ever seen.
Yeah. And I mean, I've not talked to the coaches, but I don't think this is a huge competition. Yeah. DJ was brought in to start. That's it. I mean, he has already shown, I think, the film that he's head and shoulders above what Oregon State had on the roster in past years. Aiden Childs is going to be kind of that wild card, but I think ideally you want him to try to redshirt or maybe get some backup minutes just because he is raw, young. I mean, DJ's what is he, 240, 250? And then somebody's just posted that he ran at 20 miles. He was running 20 miles an hour. That's a load to take down. And he already has the speed of the game. I just think this is he can make the throws. He knows the speed of the game. I don't know necessarily.
Here's the comment. Again, apparently this is coming from John Dunmore's social media. I haven't seen this, but this is dropped in the YouTube chat that DJ ran at 20 miles per hour and Aiden Childs was at 19 this winter. Obviously, they're running through their conditioning program, so they're getting some of these numbers from that.
So Carter, do you think? I mean, honestly, do you think this is a competition, or do you think it's no? Yeah.
No, I mean, I would be very quick to say no to that, just because. Go look at some of the stats. Like, if you go look at DJ's stats at Clemson, like obviously it underperforms what Clemson had hoped. But I think somebody mentioned this in the lodge. Like, if you extrapolated those numbers to Oregon State's record books, he'd be one of the greatest Oregon State quarterbacks of all time.
He'd be top 6. Yeah.
So, like, even though he was like quote unquote disappointing at Clemson, he would right away be an all-time great at Oregon State. And like, with all due respect to Ben Gulbranson, and with as much as we've hyped up Aiden Childs, like I just don't think they can compete with that.
Yeah, and I think the bottom line is I think DJ's here to kind of revamp his numbers and kind of, you know, the offense fits him better. We've talked a little bit about Clemson and about their offense, and maybe it didn't highlight his skill set. Oregon State fits him perfectly, the offense that Oregon State runs. So yeah, this is a situation. I think ideally this is a one and done for DJ. He's coming in, he's going to win a bunch of games, and then head to the NFL and make way for Aiden Childs.
We've got more DJ conversation coming up, but I do want to highlight some of the other position groups as we just take kind of a general overview of the roster right now. So let's move to running back, which I think might be the most sure thing on this roster this year. I would say offensive line might compete for that. But as far as returning production goes, I mean, Oregon State's not losing anyone at running back, and that's saying a lot considering, you're returning one of the best running back rooms in the Pac-12, if not the country, potentially. Damian Martinez coming back as a sophomore. We've got another year of Deshaun Fenwick, Trey Lowe, Jam Griffin, Isaiah Newell broke out at the end of the season, and then a whole slew of walk-ons who have gotten some playing time and always look pretty good in camp because they run them through a lot. I mean, just the amount of production that comes back from a group that has been so good for so long. Like, I just don't even know if there are any storylines there because we know it's going to be good.
Yeah, I think the biggest storyline is whether Trey Lowe will be healthy. I mean, that's kind of the thing I'm watching there. But yeah, Jam Griffin, Deshaun Fenwick, Damian Martinez. I mean, it's so much talent there. So many guys. I mean, I think you have to say that Damian Martinez has earned the number one starting spot. But with those other guys there, there's so many 1, 2, 3 punch there. So huge. And the other area I'm really anxious to see with Damian Martinez is how his receiving game has improved. Just to see him out of the backfield, I think would be just a huge addition to his game.
Some of these guys actually kind of develop in pass pro too as they get stronger in their off-season conditioning. So oftentimes we will ask about, how's your pass pro coming? And, is that an area that you're developing in? And oftentimes they say yes in spring because, you're not out there running through organized practice. So the only things you can work on are some of the more physical elements. And as you get stronger and as you get quicker, pass protection and blocking gets better there too. So,
and as they learn the playbook, it's first they're starting just trying to learn what their blocking assignments or their running assignments. But I think we're going to see a huge jump, and it's just going to make him a complete overall better back.
I mentioned the offensive line as being like pretty equally a sure thing. Oregon State returning most of its production there and bolstering it even with some transfers, with some newcomers. Of course, Oregon State always has a guy or two that pops in the middle of his career after a couple of years of development under Jim Maholichek. But it feels like, Angie, this might be the offensive line with the fewest questions around it. I will go back to 2021 being one of those years where we knew it was going to be pretty good. But I think this year it's safe to say this has the potential to be one of Oregon State's best offensive lines ever, and certainly one of the best in recent history. And that's, again, saying a lot because the Beavers have been so good up front since Jim Maholichek took over. But with the amount of guys that you're bringing back, with the way that you're filling any potential holes that you have with players like Grant Stark and Hanele Bloomfield, who stepped in last year, that starting lineup is going to be as good as it's ever been. And I think you feel confident about 1 or 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 guys coming off the bench and providing you a lift if you should need it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, just the return of Joshua Gray is huge, just because he has that veteran. I mean, this will be 3-year starter now. Or was he? Is this 4?
I believe so. It's so hard to keep track.
I know, because he was a gray shirt
and a freshman at one point.
Yeah. So anyway, but just that veteran leadership. Another guy I want to highlight is Tanner Miller. He came in so many times, and it was such a force. Tolly Fuaga, another just huge addition. But Grant Stark's going to be an interesting one to see how he fits in, and because I do think he can help make that line better. But you're right, it's that running game and the offensive line, I think, are just so the sky's the limit for that group.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Angie, but I believe we heard that Marco Brewer will still be unavailable for camp. Is that
Yes,
correct?
that's what I've heard. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's still rehabbing the injury that ended his 2022 season. But assuming he's healthy for the fall, I mean, it's absurd how many starting caliber players Oregon State's going to have on the line. I mean, Grant Stark came in probably to start, but he's competing with Hanelli Bloomfield and Marco Brewer at the guard spots, we assume. And those are two guys who were like some of the best blockers in the conference a year ago. So like, I think you go back to the way Oregon State has not only developed its starters on the offensive line, but that it has built so much depth that you have a guy like Tanner Miller last year that comes in as a walk-on and is immediately contributing.
Yeah.
It's impressive stuff.
And the thing I love about what Coach Michalczyk is doing is that he has all those guys. Yeah, they might, kind of be penciled in at guard, but he teaches them all the positions, because if he needs to shuffle guys around, he wants them to be ready to, whether they need to move to tackle or they need to move to the other side. I mean, he's got them ready. And that's another huge benefit, especially for linemen, just because you do get injuries and you need to be able to have next man up.
And you've seen that even with some of the best players on the line in the last 2 years. Jake Levengood moved from guard to center, immediately became one of the best centers in the Pac-12. Brandon Kipper moved from tackle to guard. I mean, it's impressive, the versatility of these guys. We're going to have no idea what that lineup is going to look like, because so many guys are going to get so much time at every single position this spring.
And I could see Michalczyk tinkering, I mean, maybe he'll see something from Stark that he likes him better at tackle, or, I mean, I can see him kind of creating as he goes.
Completely. Okay, let's move to tight end, where we will not see Jack Velling this spring. He will be held out with an injury that should only keep him out for a couple of months. I believe, Angie, you said that he will be good to go for fall.
Fall is what I'm hearing. It sounds like a shoulder. He's been spotted on campus with a sling, maybe I don't know. I have not confirmed, but sling could be like a rotator cuff or some kind of shoulder injury. That's what I'm hearing from people seeing him on campus. So he will be out just spring, but should be back by fall.
Again, that's Jack Velling, who by one publication was a freshman All-American last year. So one of the many promising young players on Oregon State's roster, really popped when Luke Musgrave went down. Took a couple of weeks, but that second half of the season, he was rock solid at tight end. So in his absence, I think we'll see a lot of Jermaine Terry II, who transferred in from California over the offseason. Oregon State effectively trading tight ends with JT Byrne going down to the Golden Bears and Jermaine Terry coming back. All respects in the world to JT Byrne. I think he's going to be a good player for Cal, but it does feel like Oregon State probably upgraded at this position. Jermaine Terry, I think, is going to come in and take those Jack Velling reps right away.
Yeah.
That's not to take away from any of the other tight ends Oregon State has, because there are quite a few in the waiting. Jake Overman, of course, as a blocker, and then you've got Bryce Caulfield and Gabe Milborn, who are always good in camp, and from what I've heard, are ready to play on Saturdays. There's just guys ahead of them. But I think Jermaine Terry is going to be the guy to watch in that room this spring.
Absolutely. And he's going to be that big body receiver, I think, that everybody's been kind of waiting for. Tight end receiver hybrid. Another one that I'm anxious to see, because I don't think he's played tight end in a long time, but offseason position move. Mm-hmm. Riley Sharp, former linebacker, turned back to tight. He played some tight end in high school. So Riley, I love Riley, but he's kind of, he took a 2-year church mission. So he's kind of like the grandpa of the group. But it's nice to have some maturity in that room. I'm not saying, wait, that's not bad. I'm not saying that the guys in the room are not mature, but it's nice to have a veteran like him to kind of help. And I'm just anxious to see where he's at. I mean, I can see him being a blocker, but maybe kind of in that Tegan Quatoriano. Maybe, I don't know, Carter. We've had some questions about who fills the Hammer's role. And I can see Riley Sharp being that kind of guy who maybe comes in as a fullback, maybe comes in as a H-back, blocking tight end. I don't know. That's just something I'm kind of curious to see.
This has been something that I've been saying since the change came to light. Yeah. I mean, I think it's almost a no-brainer, because you look at the path that Jack Coletto took. Obviously, Riley Sharp never played quarterback, but the linebacker tight end connection, I mean, this has the Hammer role written all over it, right? I mean, a guy who who probably doesn't project as an elite receiving tight end by any stretch of the imagination. He's probably going to be a pretty decent blocker because he has played such a physical position. But I think,
but he probably has sneaky hands. And
I think it has all the makings of a lead blocker, an H-back, a fullback, a direct snap, just plow through the line kind of role for Riley Sharp. And I mean, to get him to move off of outside linebacker, where he led Oregon State in sacks last year, where he has been a starter throughout his career, to get him to move away from that, like, that he's not necessarily guaranteed a role, but like they have designed something for him on the offense. Otherwise you wouldn't do it.
And just think about how fun it has to be for him, just to have some change. And that's exactly what I've been thinking too, as people keep asking, well, how are you going to replace the hammer? And I just think we don't. I mean, the hammer, I mean, dude, when Jack Coletto refers to himself in the third person or the hammer, there's just no replacing Jack Coletto. But I'm excited because I think Riley Sharp is going to be that guy.
Let's talk about wide receiver then, as we close out the offense, because we've talked about these positions as being pretty good and kind of a known commodity, but I think the wide receiver group is probably the biggest question mark on offense now. I guess quarterback is still a question mark just because we don't know really what they're going to get out of it, but I feel like we're pretty confident that Oregon State will take a step forward there. Are we confident that Oregon State will look better at receiver this year, though?
I think there's just too many unknowns. I mean, I think everybody can be hopeful, and that's all eyes. I mean, Oregon State had 3 freshmen come in. Is that right? We have Taz Reddix, Montrell Hatton.
4, but 3 are on campus.
3 are on campus. Yeah, Zach Ricard is on campus. Tastine Reddix and Montrell Hatton are all on campus right now. Give you that bigger body. That is going to be something I'm watching. Silas Bolden, I think is he poised to take the next step? I think what we saw from him in the Vegas Bowl was not that he didn't have a good season, but what I saw from him in the Vegas Bowl was just like kind of another level. And so can he continue that? Can he be consistent in that? Anthony Gould, another one. Oregon State, what they've been missing though, is really that bigger body possession receiver. Can a Taz Reddix be that guy? That's the question. Or Jermaine Terry. Jermaine Terry too.
Right. And especially if Velling's good to go in the fall, I think in the spring, you'll probably see Terry just kind of exclusively at tight end, but it would be interesting to see, following the Kyle Pitts, the Drake London, kind of bigger bodied receiver path that seems to be a kind of a trend right now. Like maybe Jermaine Terry's that guy, but at least in the spring, I think you see more of the freshmen come in and get some opportunities right away, just because if you read into what Jonathan Smith said on signing day, I mean, he said right away, he doesn't go out and guarantee opportunities, but he said that he thinks at least 2 of these receivers will play this fall. Going back just a couple of years ago, we've already seen this. I mean, Zariah Beeson came in as a true freshman and was one of the best receivers on the team that year. We know that like Oregon State will play freshman receivers if they're ready to go. And I think it is one of the positions where you can kind of step in as a freshman a little bit easier at receiver than maybe a linebacker or a lineman or a tight end. But receiver is one of those positions where young guys can pop. And I think the fact that Smith was ready to say that before these guys even made it to campus, like I do think we see a couple of these guys, maybe not shine, but definitely look like they're ready to play. And
John Dunbar's another one. I want to see him. I mean, again, I thought toward the end of the season, he started to kind of flash. And so it's just consistency now. Can these guys take that next step, be consistent? And I do think with the running game and with the addition of DJ or Aiden Childs, but DJ, that brings in a whole other element to the offense in that the quarterback can run. And so that's going to keep offenses a little more off balance than having more of a statue type quarterback. Having that, I think, just helps the whole offense and maybe helps open up the passing game a little bit.
Yeah. Silas Bolden, Anthony Gould, I think you probably expect them to be pretty big playmakers, but outside of that, again, that's where the question marks come from. Can John Dunmore take the next step? I feel like we both think he can. He just has to prove it. Yeah. And then the freshmen, what do you get out of them?
And like I said, Silas too. I felt like we saw glimmers from him, but I really felt toward the end. And then, like I said, really in the Vegas Bowl, he really flashed.
Yeah.
Now, can he do this consistently? I saw someone in the lodge say, we saw it almost looked Brandon Cooks-esque, some of the things he was doing in the Vegas Bowl. But what Brandon Cooks had that made Brandon Cooks was the fact that he was consistent, and you just knew it was money anytime the ball was to him. That's what we need to see now from these veterans like Silas and Anthony Gould.
And they both wore number 7, so that obviously means that Silas Bolden will be the next Brandon Cooks.
Of course, Carter.
Yeah. To the defensive side of the ball now, a group that loses 6 starters and a lot of movement on this side, particularly on the back end. But at linebacker 2, it's interesting, Angie, that we talk about the defensive line being like one of the more known commodities of this team, but that's the case this year. Not saying that it's going to be one of the best position groups, because even last year when they took the step forward in run defense, like it was still very clear that there was work that needed to be done on the D line. This will be a position that probably outside of the 2010 to 2013 range has always been kind of a weakness at Oregon State. Probably will continue to be. It's very hard to recruit to, but when you get guys like Sione Lolohea and James Rawls to come back as multi-year starters, as guys who made a pretty big impact last year, I think that's reason to be excited a little bit about this group, not only in run defense, but I think they could take a step forward in the pass rush and maybe help you out in an area that you kind of struggled in last year.
Yeah, I think that is going to be my big, what I'm watching, especially early in fall. It's just kind of how that D-line kind of comes together, but really watching those outside linebackers, seeing what the newcomers can do, a Kelsey Howard or Melvin Jordan, even in the middle linebacker position, just to see what some of these younger guys that have been in the system. I do think to take the next step, Oregon State has to get that pass rush a little stronger. But I think the biggest question mark is laying right there in the back end in the secondary, because there's just so many departures of guys that had just veteran guys. I mean, you lose Jaden Grant, you lose Alex Austin, 2 guys that seriously had 4, 5, 6 years between them, or each. So that's hard. That's hard to replace. Rajon Wright, one of the Beaver's top corners. So although I'm excited to see Jaden Robinson, because I think he really took a huge step when he got in this past year. They're lucky that Katana Ladapo came back, because that gives them that veteran leadership. But that is going to be the big ticket. And I still think Oregon State needs to look to the portal for another guy or two to kind of help fill in the gaps heading into fall camp. But spring's going to be a time for the young guys. And that to me is the biggest question.
What's your concern level, if you have one, I guess, with the defense and its ability or inability to replace those starters? Like, how much confidence do you have that your group of newcomers, returning backups, and a defensive coordinator that looks like he's probably one of the best in the Pac-12, but again, that's only one season. Like, do you have any concerns that might not work out, and that you might see the defense take a step backward from
I do have
a group that was one of the best in the Pac-12 last year?
I do, though, Carter, because I've been around this game and covering Oregon State for a long time. And cornerbacks seem to take a year or two in Oregon State system, whether that was under Coach Riley, whether that was under Coach Smith. They seem to take a year to kind of get their feet under them. I mean, we saw that with Rajon. We saw it with Nahshon. Alex Austin.
Was a freshman.
So we see those freshmen take their lumps. So it could be, it'd be fantastic if they could go to the portal and get a guy that, maybe has Pac-12 or D1 college experience. But I do like the fact that, Coach Blue's been there. Even the young guys have played under him and practiced under him, know the expectations with Coach Bray. But I do question, I can't tell you the last time a true freshman came in at corner and killed it. Honestly, can you?
No, we saw some flashes from Austin as a freshman, but more often than not, like, he was the guy that was responsible for some of the bigger plays.
He got picked on all the time.
But like, you could see that there was some potential there, and obviously the next year he popped. But I think the one thing that helps, and again, I am concerned about the secondary, not so much the guys at the top, but I've been saying this all off season. I just don't think there's enough depth there. And that's why you think they should go to the portal. I completely agree.
Yeah.
But with the guys that are going to step in and probably start, I think the one thing that helps is that these are not true freshmen. These are guys who have had 2 to 3, Jaden Robinson, maybe even 4 now at this point, off seasons or seasons to develop and frankly to play. I mean, these guys have seen the field. So like, it's not like you're throwing somebody into the fire. Skylar Thomas had a pick in like his second career game 2 years ago. So like, these are guys that have developed and have playing experience. I think that helps your cause. But if we want to transition to another position, if you look at like inside linebacker where you lose both starters, obviously Easton Mascarenas-Arnold is ready to start. He probably was last year. He probably was as a freshman, to be honest.
Yeah.
But outside of that, like, that's a position where you're going to be relying on somebody to step in right away. Otherwise, like that might be the most important position in Oregon State's defense. It certainly was in the Tibesar era, but even Trent Bray was using the inside linebackers in a similar way. I don't know. I wouldn't say I'm concerned about this group, but I just think it's very unproven, considering you're going to rely on a Mason Tufaga who didn't play at Utah or
John Miller.
John Miller, who's played sparingly he's played on special teams, but defense.
Melvin Jordan.
Melvin Jordan, who hasn't played at linebacker. I mean, I think it's somewhat of a concern right now.
Absolutely. I think it is too. So there are definitely big question marks. And this is where, you hope that some of the young guys can really jump in and contribute, and then hope some of the veterans can, help get them up to speed too. But I agree. And then, like I said, then the outside linebacker and edge rushers, who's going to step up and actually elevate that position? That's another key.
That was where I was going to close out the defense was, we have all these questions about secondary inside backer. I think we feel pretty confident in what we know about the D line. But outside linebacker is one of those wild cards where it feels like Oregon State has the talent, and it probably bolstered it this offseason even, but the production just hasn't been there. Are you confident that guys like Nico Taylor, Olu Omatosho can come in right away, that guys like John McCartan can take a step up? I mean, I think the fact that we see Riley Sharp move to the offense is telling that the coaching staff thinks outside linebacker will be better, because you wouldn't give up your leading sacker like that if you didn't have confidence. But I mean, do you share that? Like, are you high on the group too?
It's unknown. I mean, it's unproven, but I mean, McCartan, I think Ryan Franke should be back, and we've seen some, glimmers from him, but I think Andrew Chatfield took a huge step toward the end of last season. I think he's going to be called on and expected. I think Kelsey Howard, newcomer, again, very unknown, but I like his makeup, and I think he could be one of these. He's my early call before watching anything. He's my call to be the guy that maybe is the freshman that pops and stands out. And he's my
That's tough
Damian
to do
Martinez.
as a defensive lineman.
Yeah, no, but I think he has that makeup to do it. I think he has the mindset, the swagger. I think he's got it. I think he can handle the pressure. I think he's ready for that role. So I'm anxious to see, how he handles now going up against, Pac-12 O-linemen and not just high school. But I think he is one of those guys that may kind of take a step. But I think Chatfield is prepped. I think, McCartan. I ran across some pictures of McCartan when he came for the spring game back when he was a high school senior, and that kid has totally transformed himself. It's crazy to see, but that's what happens when I get bored and start looking through photos.
We'll close this out with the special teams, and it's a group that Angie, I don't expect to learn a whole lot from this spring. I mean, oftentimes, they run through a decent amount of special teams periods. Like, they spend probably 15 to 20 minutes on special teams per day, but the amount that we can actually learn from it is so small that, like, it's a good thing we already know that Anthony Gould and Silas Bolden are two of the best returners in the country, because that's something that we can run with all off season. Because I mean, last year we were watching 5, 6, 7 guys rotate through, and we didn't even know who was going to get the job. Like, that's just how hard it is to gain anything on special teams. Yeah. Another element of that too is, of course, the kicking situation is of supreme intrigue to a lot of fans and to us, certainly this offseason with Oregon State struggling so much in field goals outside of 30 yards last year. it is so hard to translate what you see in practice to game day, because I mean, Angie, you've watched Everett Hayes kick for what, 3 years now? Like,
Yeah.
you've seen what I've seen. He's lights out in practice. I mean, he will
Yeah.
nail 90% of his field goals, but obviously that didn't translate to game day last year. So I think we'll know more about the kicking situation if Hayes and Sappington struggle this spring. Like, I think that's telling of, okay, you've got, like, you should be concerned about kicking because it's not getting better in practice. But if they do look better in practice, like, we can't guarantee that's going to translate.
Yeah. I mean, kicking is such a weird, I always say it's kind of similar to like almost like baseball hitting and golf, because it's such a mental thing that I think sometimes these guys get in their own heads. They just need to, it's the confidence. So yeah, I mean, it's going to be telling to see how these guys react now this off season. And then just getting it down and getting the mental side of it right. Because we know they can kick. We know they can hit field goals. It's that mental aspect of being able to do it.
I mean, Everett Hayes made a 60-yarder in a game to send a game to overtime. It's like he has it in him. It's it's a mental thing. They get in their own head sometimes. Sometimes they overthink. Yeah. Let's end with this, Angie. How excited are you to see Josh Green finally?
So excited for him
at punter.
Yeah, so excited. Just, I mean, talk about a kid who has really, I mean, far from home, coming from, Australia, New Zealand,
Australia.
But just, he's bided his time, great teammate. I'm excited to see him get his chance.
If you haven't read up on Josh Green, I'm
Carter
sure you can still Google this feature that I wrote in one of the bye weeks, not this past season, but the year prior, after he came in from Laney College down in Oakland, one of the many to come from that pipeline. Obviously, he was part of that group that was there around the Last Chance U era, but I don't think he was featured. In fact, he might have been at Oregon State a year too early to be there on that. But if you can go check out, I'll try to find the link and maybe post this in the lodge at some point this spring to go find that story on Josh Green. His story, I mean, to think that he's coming to the U.S. to play basketball and then just randomly picks up a football and, only having watched, Aussie rules football, just starts kicking it, because obviously that's what you do in Australia. Turns out he's a pretty good punter and got some looks. Actually, I believe committed to Fresno State at one point.
Yes, he was committed
before he came to Oregon State. So, it's a fun story. Again, I'll maybe put that in the lodge at some point this spring, just to remind everybody. He's an awesome personality too, from what I've gained. We have so many photos of him from the 2 bowl weeks of, I think he was hanging out with Shrek at Universal Studios, and we had him eating a donut last year. So we know that the personality's there. I'm hopeful that maybe we get a chance to interview him this offseason. That's going to wrap it up for our spring camp preview. That was a good 45 minutes that we spent there. I have another page of notes that we didn't even get to, but that's a good thing.
Yes,
because all of that we didn't get to is included in 2 articles that will go live on the site on Tuesday and Wednesday. I've got 3 predictions, one for the offense, defense, and special teams that'll run on Wednesday. But tomorrow on Tuesday, I outlined 3 main things that we're watching for in camp this offseason. So keep an eye out for those. Probably hear some of what we talked about, but there's a little bit in there that we didn't necessarily touch on a whole lot. Okay, Angie, we have time to close out the show with Name That Beav. I'll cue the music. It is my turn to disappoint myself in my
knowledge. I got my pen ready to
Oregon State football student athletes.
Keep track. Okay, I'm gonna pull up here because I need to make sure.
All right. In the meantime, I'll remind everybody what happened last week. So Angie took round 1 over the first 2 weeks of this game. She beat me 11-12 in the first 2-week segment. She leads the series 1-0, and she took 11 guesses to guess Sammy Strotter last week in our 3rd edition of Name That Beav. So I have to beat 11. I'm looking to become the first person to guess it in 10 or fewer.
Are you going to turn off your comments in case?
I'm not looking at the chat.
Okay.
I'm not cheating here. Okay. I think everybody knows the rules by now, so let's just get going.
Let's go.
Angie, was this student athlete on the team in the last 10 years?
No.
Okay. Was this an offensive player?
No.
Were they a linebacker?
Yes.
Okay, I have an idea. I'm just going to go right now. Was it Trent Bray?
Yes.
Yeah! Nice!
I thought I might
Boom.
like psych you out a little bit. Like, damn. 4.
That's it. I win.
That's the game's over now. Like
4 guesses.
4 guesses.
Too easy.
That was too easy. I went back and forth at a couple guys in my head, and then I'm like, well, he won't even think to go Trent Bray because he'll think that's just too easy. See?
Nope.
I get in my own
glad
head
you went
too.
there.
See?
No, that's okay. Actually, that's kind of a good one because, obviously with him being a coach, like maybe you exclude that from your thought process, but
Yeah.
no,
Okay.
that was
I
pretty good.
thought it might be too obvious that you would just go over it. Like, no, she will not go that easy.
Well, I even thought about it. I was going to say, maybe I shouldn't guess somebody this early, but nah. Like if we're talking linebackers in the 2000 to 2010 range, like Trent Bray's like right up there with the best of them. So yeah.
Well, my favorite was Nick Barnett and Richard Sigler, but I actually thought that might be too far back for you, youngin.
Is Keaton Christic a safety or a linebacker?
Linebacker.
Okay,
Hit
he probably
stick. They
he
called him
probably
the
would.
hit stick.
Yeah, he probably would have been my next guess.
Okay. Sorry, Eric F says pretty damn easy. Angie. Yes, like I said, I'm trying. Carter's a youngin. He doesn't quite have. Well, I'm old though, so.
Hey, I just threw Keaton Christic out there though.
I know. Look at that. Okay, next time it's on, dude. I'm going
geez.
hard. I'm going obscure, like backup.
See, I think what happened is you got complacent because you had the lead.
Well, yeah. Like I said, I thought it might be so obvious that you'd overlook it. Is what I thought because I thought I thought you would overthink it. So I thought I was gonna like double back on you here and like, oh, he'll overthink it and he won't go, Trent Bray.
No, you can't fool me. Angie.
Oh gosh, darn it!
Set a new record. 4 guesses is
yeah. I don't think I'm ever going to beat that one because
I mean, yeah. Good luck. The series
why did
is
you
now
go?
tied.
Why did you go linebacker?
I don't know. Because you went defensive lineman last week, so I was figuring maybe you wouldn't go with 2 linemen in a row, and secondary, like there's just too many guys there. So if it was a linebacker, I knew there were only a couple of places I could go with that.
Well,
I don't want to give you. I don't want to give you my secrets here.
Okay.
So.
Oh, I got the next one. Oh, I got the next one. So good. You're never going to get it. Okay.
Stay tuned. 2 weeks from now.
Angie and Carter's adventures here.
I like this. This is a fun way to close the show. All right. Series is tied 1-1. I take this round 11-4. Yeah.
Oh,
Sorry,
Lord.
Angie.
Oh, Lord.
All right. Spring camp starts a week from now. A week from tomorrow, I guess, as we record this. Angie's going to have full coverage of week 1. I've got another basketball game and a couple of baseball games in me before I head out of town. But then I will be back for week 2 of camp, and we'll have another episode on the podcast side, at least, talking spring camp as soon as I get back. So we'll recap spring camp week 1 then, but we are going to take next week off. Angie, just a quick reminder to you and to everyone else that's listening, 30% off your first year at BeaverBlitz.com. Take advantage while you can. Spring camp, again, is a big time for VIP content. So make sure to do that as long as that is available. And Angie, let's do it again in 2 weeks.
Let's do it.
Right?
Go have fun in Paris.
All right. Well, until then, you can follow her at Angie Machado 1. You can follow me at Carter Bahns. And we will talk to you in 2 weeks for another episode of the Damn Podcast.